My son sat there grinning like a hungry wolf at a buffet. He thought he had won. He thought my ex-wife's $30 million empire was his to burn. He looked me in the eye across the mahogany table and mouthed the words, "You are nothing, old man." But then the lawyer cleared his throat, read one single clause, and my son's smile shattered like glass on a concrete floor. Before I tell you how I taught him the hardest lesson of his life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. My name is Lawrence Prentice. I am 70 years old. I stood on the sidewalk outside the St. Patrick's Cathedral, shivering not from the cold, but from a humiliation so deep it felt like it was freezing my marrow. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal suit. It was frayed at the cuffs and tight around the shoulders. It was 20 years old. It was the same suit I wore the day Catherine and I signed the papers for our first warehouse. It smelled of mothballs and old memories. I thought it was respectful. My son Bradley thought it was an insult. I took a step toward the heavy oak doors. I just wanted to see her one last time. Catherine. My Katie. Even after 20 years of divorce and silence, I needed to say goodbye. I needed to tell her that I kept my promise. A hand slammed against my chest. It was heavy and firm. I looked up. Bradley stood there. My son. He was 40 years old, but in that moment he looked like a petulant child wearing a $3,000 Italian suit. His face was flushed. His eyes were wide, not with grief, but with rage. "Get out of here," he hissed. His voice was a low growl. "Bradley, please," I said. My voice sounded thin and weak to my own ears. "I just want to pay my respects. She was my wife for 15 years. She is your mother." "She was your ex-wife," Bradley corrected me. He took a step forward, forcing me back toward the curb. "You lost the right to call her family 2 decades ago when you signed those divorce papers and walked away with nothing. You are a loser, Lawrence. You are a stain on this day. Look at you. You look like a homeless person trying to crash a gala." He scanned me from my scuffed shoes to my graying hair with a look of pure disgust. Monica appeared beside him. My daughter-in-law. She was wearing a black dress that was too tight and too short for a funeral. She wore diamonds that I recognized. They were Catherine's diamonds. She had raided the jewelry box before the body was even cold. "Bradley. Get him out of here," Monica snapped. She didn't even look at me. She was looking over my shoulder at the parking lot where luxury cars were pulling in. "The investors are arriving. The board of directors is here. We cannot have him standing here looking like a beggar. It ruins the brand." The brand. My wife's death was a branding opportunity for them. I looked at Monica. "Monica, that necklace. Catherine wore that on our 10th anniversary. Finders keepers." Old man Monica sneered. She checked her reflection in the glass door of the church. "Now move. You are blocking the entrance for the VIPs. I tried to stand my ground. "I am his father, Bradley. Does that mean nothing to you?" "It means I have bad genetics," Bradley laughed. It was a cruel sound. "You are not my father. You are a biological donor who didn't have the guts to succeed. Mom hated you. She told me every day how much she despised you for leaving her. She built this empire out of spite. She wanted you to see it and weep. And now she is gone and everything is mine." He was lying. I knew he was lying. Catherine never hated me. We had a plan. A painful secret plan that broke our hearts to save our son. But Bradley didn't know that. He only saw the surface. He only saw the billionaire mother and the broke father living in a rental apartment. I stepped forward again. "Just 5 minutes, Bradley. I will stand in the back. I won't speak to anyone." "Security," Bradley shouted. He waved his hand. Two large men in black suits stepped out from the shadows of the archway. They had been waiting. "This man is trespassing." Bradley pointed a manicured finger at my face. "He is harassing the guests. Remove him from the premises. If he resists, call the police." The guards grabbed my arms. Their grip was like iron. They didn't ask me to leave. They dragged me. They hauled me down the stone steps like a sack of garbage. My feet stumbled. My old shoe came loose and skidded across the pavement. "Please," I gasped. "I just want to say goodbye." The guests were watching. Men in dark suits and women in veils stopped to stare. I saw cameras flashing. The press was there. Of course the press was there. Catherine Prentice was a titan of industry. And here was her ex-husband being thrown into the gutter by her grieving son. The guards shoved me. I lost my balance and fell hard onto the wet concrete of the sidewalk. My knee scraped against the ground, tearing the fabric of my only suit. Pain shot up my leg. I looked up. Bradley was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. He wasn't sad. He looked powerful. He adjusted his tie and smiled. "Go back to your hole, Lawrence. Don't come near the reading of the will. You get nothing. Zero. Nada. You are dead to this family." He turned his back on me. Monica hooked her arm through his, and they walked into the church. The heavy doors slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. I sat there on the cold ground. It started to rain, a slow gray drizzle that soaked into my clothes and chilled my skin. I reached for my shoe. My hand was shaking. I put it back on. I didn't fight them. I didn't scream. I didn't tell the reporters who swarmed around me that I was the co-founder of Prentice Logistics. I didn't tell them that 20 years ago I stepped down and took the blame for a financial scandal I didn't commit just to keep Bradley out of juvenile detention. I didn't tell them that I lived in poverty so Bradley could have a clean record. I just stood up. I brushed the dirt off my knees. I looked at the closed doors of the church and whispered goodbye, Katie. I will finish what we started. I walked to the bus stop. I didn't even have a car to get here. I had taken 3 buses to get to the funeral. I sat on the bench waiting for the number 42 bus that would take me back to the rundown side of the city where I lived. The ride took an hour. I stared out the window watching the city change from glass skyscrapers to brick factories and then to peeling siding and chain-link fences. I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. It was noisy. It smelled of detergent and stale cooking oil. But it was mine. It was the only sanctuary I had. I walked up the stairs, my knee throbbing with every step. All I wanted to do was take off this wetsuit, pour myself a glass of cheap whiskey, and look at the one photo I had of Catherine hidden in my drawer. But when I reached the landing, I saw that my sanctuary had been breached. The door to my apartment was wide open. The lock had been busted. Splinters of wood littered the hallway floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. Burglars. In this neighborhood, it was common. I rushed inside, ready to yell, ready to fight for the few meager possessions I had. But it wasn't burglars. It was worse. Bradley and Monica were standing in the middle of my living room. They had beaten me home. They must have left the funeral immediately after the service, skipped the burial, and driven straight here in their Porsche. The apartment was a disaster zone. My drawers were pulled out. My clothes were scattered on the floor. My mattress was overturned. "What are you doing?" I shouted. I dropped my wet umbrella. "Get out of my house. This isn't your house," Lawrence Bradley said. He was holding a beer, my beer. He took a sip and made a face of disgust before pouring the rest onto my carpet. "This is a charity case." "What are you talking about?" I asked. I stepped over a pile of my own shirts. "Mom paid the rent on this dump," Bradley sneered. He kicked a stack of old magazines. "Did you think you were paying for it with your Social Security checks? Please. The rent here is $1,200 a month. You make $800. Mom had a standing order to cover the difference. She pitied you. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew Catherine helped sometimes, but I didn't know she paid the rent directly. I thought I was managing. I thought I had some dignity left. "Well, the charity stops today," Bradley announced. He threw the empty beer bottle into the sink. It shattered. "The accounts are frozen until probate clears. But I am the executor, and I am canceling the lease. The landlord is already on his way. I told him we are clearing out the dead weight." "You can't do this," I said. My voice was trembling. "I have rights. I live here." "You have nothing," Monica piped up. She was standing by the window holding her phone up. The little red light was on. She was live streaming. "Hey guys, look at this," she said to the camera, pouting her lips. "This is what happens when you are a toxic ex. You end up in a place like this. Total squalor. We are doing a clean out today." Karma. She panned the camera around, showing my humble life to the world. She zoomed in on my old television. She laughed at my collection of paperback books. "Stop that." I lunged for the phone, but Bradley stepped in between us. He shoved me back. "Don't touch her," he warned. His eyes were cold. "We are doing you a favor, old man. We are helping you pack." He pointed to the open window. Below in the alleyway, I could see my furniture. My armchair was lying upside down in a puddle. My lamp was smashed. They had thrown my things out the window. "You threw my things out," I whispered. "Only the junk," Bradley said. "Which is everything." He walked over to the small desk in the corner. It was the only piece of furniture left. On it sat a small wooden box. It contained my most precious possessions, my grandfather's watch, and the letters Catherine wrote me when we were courting. Bradley picked up the box. "Give that to me," I said. My voice was low and dangerous. "Put that down, Bradley." Or what Bradley challenged me. He shook the box. It rattled. "What's in here?" "More trash." He opened it. He pulled out the letters. He looked at the handwriting. "God, Mom had terrible handwriting," he laughed. He didn't even read them. He just crumpled them up one by one and dropped them on the floor. Then he found the car keys. The keys to my 2005 Ford pickup truck. It was rusted. It had 200,000 miles on it. But it ran. It was the only way I could get to the odd jobs I did to make extra cash. "Ah, here we go," Bradley said, dangling the keys. "I was looking for these." "That is my truck," I said. I took a step forward. My hands were clenched into fists. "I bought that truck." "Actually," Bradley smirked, looking at a document on his phone. "The title is in Mom's name. She bought it for you 10 years ago because your credit score was too low to get a loan." Remember, I remembered. I remembered the shame of asking her for help. I remembered her kindness. "Since it is in her name, it is now part of the estate," Bradley said. He pocketed the keys. "And as the sole heir, I am repossessing it." "You don't need that truck," I begged. I hated myself for begging, but I had no choice. "Bradley, please. It is worth nothing to you. It is everything to me. I need it to work. If you take that, I can't make money." "Not my problem," Bradley said. He walked past me, bumping my shoulder. "I am selling it for scrap. Every dollar counts, right? Gotta pay for the champagne at the funeral reception." He walked to the door. Monica followed him, still filming. "Say bye to the fans." "Lawrence," she giggled. Bradley stopped at the doorway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill. He tossed it at me. It fluttered to the floor. It was a $100 bill. "There," he said. "Buy yourself a bus ticket to a nursing home, or a bottle of booze. I don't care. Just be out of here by sunset. The landlord is changing the locks." They left. I heard their footsteps going down the stairs. I heard them laughing. Then I heard the engine of my truck start. It coughed once, then roared to life. I ran to the window. I watched as Bradley pulled my truck out of the alley. He revved the engine hard, grinding the gears on purpose. He sped away, followed by Monica in the Porsche. They left me standing in an empty apartment with my clothes on the floor and $100 bill at my feet. I didn't pick up the money. I walked over to the crumpled letters. I smoothed them out with shaking hands. I read Catherine's words from 40 years ago. My dearest Lawrence, we can conquer the world together. As long as we have each other, we are rich. I folded the letters carefully and put them in my inside pocket next to my heart. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They took my home. They took my truck. They took my dignity in front of the world. But they forgot one thing. Bradley had mentioned the reading of the will. He said he was the sole heir. He was so sure. He was so arrogant. But I knew something he didn't. I knew that Catherine didn't trust him. I knew that for the last 5 years Bradley had been gambling. I knew he was in debt to people you don't want to owe money to. And I knew that Catherine Prentice never did anything without a backup plan. I looked around the empty room. The rain was coming in through the open window, soaking the carpet. I was homeless. I was 70. I was alone. But I wasn't powerless. I reached into the lining of my old suitcase, which was lying open on the bed. I ripped the fabric. Inside, taped to the frame, was a small black flip phone. It was an emergency burner phone. Catherine gave it to me 3 years ago. She said, "Use this only when the sharks are circling." I turned it on. The battery was low, but it worked. I dialed the one number saved in the contacts. It rang once, twice, Solomon Roth, the most expensive, the most ruthless, and the most brilliant lawyer in the state. "Hello, Lawrence," a gravelly voice answered. "I have been expecting your call." "They took everything, Solomon," I said. My voice was steady now. The coldness had settled in. "I know," Solomon said. "I saw the live stream. Your daughter-in-law has very poor judgment. Are you ready?" "I am ready," I said. "Good," Solomon said. "Come to my office tonight. Use the back entrance. The back. We have work to do before the reading tomorrow." "And Lawrence?" "Yes. Bring the suit. The old one. Don't change. Let them see the man they threw away. Because tomorrow, that man is going to own them." I hung up the phone. I looked at the $100 bill on the floor. I picked it up. I wouldn't use it for a bus ticket. I walked out of the apartment, leaving the door open. I walked into the rain. I had a long walk ahead of me, but my steps were light. My son thought he had buried me today. He didn't realize he had just planted a seed. And the harvest was coming tomorrow. The night air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and impending doom. I walked for blocks. My knee ached with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Every car that passed splashed dirty water onto my trousers, but I didn't flinch. I was focused. I needed a place to sleep, a place where they wouldn't look for me. I couldn't go to a hotel. Monica had probably flagged my name at every decent place in town just for spite, and I needed to save the cash. I found a motel on the edge of the industrial district. The Starlight Inn. The neon sign flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. The star was missing. It was just the light inn. Appropriate. I paid for a room with the $100 bill Bradley had thrown at me. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, looked at my suit, then at the money, then at me. He didn't ask questions. He handed me a key with a plastic tag that was sticky to the touch. "Room 104, he grunted. "Don't smoke in there. Or do, I don't care." The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The carpet was a shade of brown that didn't exist in nature. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. But I couldn't eat. My phone, the burner phone, vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting Solomon. It wasn't Solomon. It was an unknown number. I hesitated. Who had this number? Only Catherine and Solomon. I answered it. Hello. There was a pause. Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice that sounded like grinding metal. Mrs. Prentice, the voice said. I froze. No, this is her husband. Who is this? The voice laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Her husband. The one she dumped. Listen, old man. You tell your ex-wife or your son or whoever is holding the purse strings that the clock is ticking. What are you talking about? I asked. My grip on the phone tightened. Don't play dumb, the voice snarled. Bradley owes us. He owes us big. $5 million. He said his mommy was going to pay it off when she kicked the bucket. Well, she kicked it. We want our money. Bradley owes $5 million. I felt the room spin. I knew he gambled. I knew he was irresponsible. But $5 million. That wasn't just bad luck. That was a death wish. He gets the inheritance tomorrow, I said quickly, trying to buy time, trying to understand the scope of the danger. Tomorrow is the deadline, the voice said. If we don't have $5 million by noon, the reading of the will won't be a celebration. It will be a funeral. Another one. You understand? I understand, I whispered. Good. Tell pretty boy Bradley we are watching. The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of the motel room. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about survival. Bradley wasn't just a cruel son kicking his father out to keep the money for himself. He was a desperate man cornered by wolves. He needed that $30 million not to live in luxury, but to stay alive. He had evicted me, humiliated me, and erased me from his life because he couldn't afford to have anyone standing between him and that money. Not even for a second. Suddenly, his cruelty made sense. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. He was terrified. But he was also a fool. He had borrowed against an inheritance he didn't have yet. He had promised money that wasn't his. I stood up. I walked to the small cracked mirror over the sink. I looked at my reflection, the gray stubble on my chin, the tired eyes, the suit that hung off my frame. I looked like a victim. But I wasn't. I washed my face with cold water. The shock of it cleared my mind. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. If I did, the people holding Bradley's debt might act prematurely. They might hurt him. Despite everything, despite the way he had treated me today, he was still my son. I had promised Catherine I would protect him. But protecting him didn't mean giving him what he wanted. Giving him $30 million now would be like giving a loaded gun to a toddler. He would pay the debt and then gamble the rest away within a year. He would be dead or broke or in prison. No. I had to save him the hard way. I checked my watch. It was 8 p.m. Solomon was waiting. I left the motel room. I didn't look back. I walked into the night toward the downtown district where Solomon Roth's office occupied the top floor of a steel glass tower. The security guard at the back entrance of the Roth building knew me. He was an old friend named Marcus. He had worked for Prentice Logistics back in the day before Bradley fired him for being too old. Mr. Prentice, Marcus said, tipping his cap. His eyes widened when he saw my state. Tough day, sir. You have no idea, Marcus, I said. Is Solomon up there? He left the light on for you. Go on up. The service elevator. I rode the elevator up 40 floors. My stomach dropped, but not from the height, from the anticipation. The doors opened directly into Solomon's private office. It was a large room lined with books smelling of leather and cigar smoke. One wall was entirely glass overlooking the city lights. Solomon sat behind a massive desk. He was a small man, sharp as a razor with eyes that missed nothing. He was pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Whiskey," he said without looking up. "Single malt, aged 18 years, just like the last time we had a crisis, Lawrence." I walked over and took the glass. My hand was steady now. "He is in deep, Solomon," I said. 5 million. Sharks." Solomon nodded. He didn't look surprised. "I know, I have seen the markers. He forged Catherine's signature on a loan application 3 days before she died, while she was in a coma." I choked on the whiskey. "He did what?" "He tried to leverage the company assets," Solomon said. "The bank flagged it but didn't press charges because of the family name. But the private lenders, the ones he went to after the banks said no, they don't care about signatures. They care about blood. He is going to destroy everything I said. The company, the legacy, Catherine's work. He thinks he is going to save himself," Solomon said. "He thinks tomorrow is his coronation. He has invited the press, Lawrence. He wants to announce the sale of the company immediately after the reading. He has a buyer lined up, a competitor. They are going to strip Prentice Logistics for parts." My blood boiled. Sell the company. Catherine and I built that from a single van delivering flowers. We sweated blood for that business. "He can't," I said. "He can if he gets the inheritance," Solomon said. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Unless." "Unless what?" "Unless the will says otherwise." Solomon smiled. A thin, predatory smile. He reached into his desk and pulled out a thick document. It was bound in blue paper, sealed with wax. "Catherine wrote this 6 months ago," Solomon said. "The day she got her terminal diagnosis. She knew Bradley was spiraling. She knew Monica was whispering poison in his ear. And she knew you were still the man she fell in love with. The man who took the fall 20 years ago." He pushed the document toward me. "She left you a weapon, Lawrence, but you have to be willing to pull the trigger." I looked at the document. "What do I have to do?" Solomon stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. "Tomorrow at the reading, Bradley is going to try to crush you. He is going to try to shame you into leaving. He might even have those goons of his try to physically remove you again." "I won't leave," I said. "Good. Because you need to be in the room." The clause Catherine inserted, Clause 17b, requires the physical presence of the primary beneficiary for the trust to activate. If you aren't there, the default clause kicks in and Bradley gets everything. I stared at him. "I am the primary beneficiary." Solomon turned back to me. His eyes were gleaming. "Not exactly. It is more complicated than that, and much more painful for Bradley. You aren't getting the money, Lawrence. You are getting something much more dangerous." He tapped the document. "You are getting the power." I took another sip of whiskey. It burned, going down warm and reassuring. I thought about the $100 bill on the floor. I thought about my truck being driven away. I thought about the threat on my son's life. "I will be there," I said. Solomon nodded. "One more thing. Don't sleep at the motel. It's not safe. Sleep here on the couch. I have a shirt that might fit you. We need you to look presentable. But keep the suit coat. The tear in the knee stays." Why, I asked. Because Solomon said, pouring himself another drink, "The jury of public opinion loves a martyr, and tomorrow we are going to put Bradley on trial in front of the whole world." I settled onto the leather couch in Solomon's office. I didn't sleep much. I watched the city lights fade and the sun rise over the skyline. A new day. The day of reckoning. At 8 a.m. I washed up in the office bathroom. I put on the fresh white shirt Solomon gave me, but I pulled on my torn trousers and the frayed jacket. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a man who had been through a war, which I was. Solomon handed me a cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. Time to go, he said. We took Solomon's car, a black town car with tinted windows. We drove to the Prentice estate, the mansion on the hill, the house I had built with Catherine but hadn't stepped foot in for 20 years. The driveway was packed. News vans, luxury sedans. Bradley had turned a legal proceeding into a media circus. We parked at the gate. The security guard, a new guy I didn't recognize, stepped up to the window. Name, he asked. Solomon rolled down the window. Solomon Roth, attorney of record. And my associate. The guard checked his clipboard. You are on the list, Mr. Roth. But he pointed at me. Who is the homeless guy? Solomon didn't blink. He is carrying my briefcase. The guard sneered but waved us through. We walked to the front door. I could feel the eyes on me. The whispers. Who is that? Is that the ex-husband? Look at his shoes, disgusting. We entered the grand hall. It was filled with people. I saw faces I recognized, old employees, investors, and in the back row, looking uncomfortable, a group of men in cheap suits who didn't fit in. The sharks. They were here to collect. Bradley was standing by the fireplace holding a glass of champagne. He saw me enter. His face twisted. He marched over. I told you to stay away, he hissed. You have no shame, do you? I looked him in the eye. I am here for the reading, Bradley. There is nothing to read for you. Bradley laughed. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. Everyone look who decided to show up. My father, the man who abandoned us. He is here to see if he can scrape any crumbs from the table. The crowd laughed. Monica was filming again. Let him stay, Bradley. Monica said loud enough for the room to hear. Let him watch. It will be a good lesson for everyone. Don't be a loser like Lawrence. Bradley smirked. Fine. Stand in the corner, old man. Don't touch the furniture. You might get it dirty. He pointed to a plastic folding chair set up way in the back near the kitchen door. I walked over and sat down. I sat tall. I didn't look at my feet. I looked at the portrait of Catherine hanging above the fireplace. Her eyes seemed to be watching me. Solomon took his place at the head of the room. He opened his briefcase. He took out the blue document. The room went silent. Bradley sat in a velvet armchair, front and center, holding Monica's hand. He looked like a king waiting for his crown. Solomon adjusted his glasses. He looked at Bradley, then at me. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we are here to execute the last will and testament of Catherine Prentice. Bradley leaned forward, grinning. Skip the preamble, Solomon. Just read the part where I get the money. Solomon ignored him. Catherine was a woman of foresight. She knew the value of hard work, and she knew the dangers of unearned wealth. Bradley rolled his eyes. Blah, blah, blah. Read the numbers. Solomon turned the page. Very well. Article 1. To my son, Bradley Prentice, I leave the estate at 4500 Highland Drive, the collection of vintage automobiles, and the entirety of my personal jewelry collection. Bradley jumped up. Yes. He pumped his fist. He kissed Monica. Did you hear that, babe? The house, the cars. We are rich. He turned to the sharks in the back row and gave them a thumbs up. See, I told you. Paid in full. Wait, Solomon said. His voice cut through the celebration. There is more, Bradley said, waving his hand. Yeah, the company. Prentice Logistics. Read that part. Solomon looked down at the paper. Article 2 regarding the liquid assets totaling $30 million and the controlling shares of Prentice Logistics. Bradley held his breath. The room leaned in. These assets are not to be distributed directly, Solomon read. Bradley froze. What? Instead, Solomon continued, his voice rising. They are to be placed into the Prentice Family Trust. Trust, Bradley scoffed. Fine. Whatever. I control the trust, right? I am the only heir. Solomon shook his head. No. The trust is to be administered by a single trustee. A trustee with absolute veto power over all distributions. A trustee who has the sole authority to determine if the beneficiary is morally and financially responsible enough to receive a single dime. Who? Bradley shouted. Who is the trustee? Solomon smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just trapped a rabbit. He looked across the room, directly at the plastic chair in the corner. The sole trustee appointed by Catherine Prentice, with full authority over every cent, is her former husband and partner, Mr. Lawrence Prentice. The silence was absolute. Bradley turned slowly to look at me. His face was pale. His mouth hung open. Me. The man in the torn suit. The man he had thrown in the mud. The man whose truck he had stolen. I stood up. I buttoned my frayed jacket. I walked through the silent crowd. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked up to Bradley. I looked at the champagne glass in his hand. I took it from him and placed it on the table. Hello, son, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. We need to talk about your allowance. The neon sign outside my window buzzed with a rhythmic electric hum that sounded like a dying insect. Starlight Inn. That was a joke. There were no stars here. Only the orange glow of street lamps reflecting off puddles of dirty rainwater and the flashing lights of police cruisers passing by 2 streets over. I sat on the edge of the mattress, which sagged in the middle like a hammock. The bedspread was a polyester nightmare of brown and orange patterns designed to hide stains. I didn't want to know what kind of stains. I had pushed the only chair in the room under the doorknob. It was a flimsy barricade against the world, but it was all I had. My stomach growled a hollow, empty sound that echoed in the small room. I had eaten nothing but a packet of peanut butter crackers from the vending machine in the lobby. My dinner. My first meal as a homeless man. I reached into the pocket of my torn suit jacket. The fabric was still damp from the rain. I pulled out the $100 bill Bradley had thrown at me. It felt greasy. Dirty money. I smoothed it out on the nightstand next to the small black burner phone. That phone. It stared at me like a loaded gun. Catherine had given it to me 3 years ago when her cancer first came back. She pressed it into my hand during one of our secret meetings at the park bench. Keep this charged, Lawrence, she had said. This number is unlisted. It is only for emergencies. If the sky falls, you answer this phone. The sky had definitely fallen today. I stared at the black plastic shell. It hadn't rung in 6 months. Not since the day she went into the coma. And then suddenly, it vibrated. The sound was loud in the silence of the room. It danced across the cheap wood of the nightstand. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. Who would call this number now? Only Solomon Roth knew I had it. I flipped it open. The screen glowed blue. Unknown caller. I hesitated. A feeling of dread settled in my stomach, heavier than the hunger. I pressed the green button and held it to my ear. Hello, I said. My voice was rough like sandpaper. There was silence on the other end. No background noise. No static. Just a heavy breathing that sounded wet and impatient. Mrs. Prentice, a voice said. It was a man's voice. Deep, guttural. It sounded like gravel being crushed in a grinder. No, I said. Mrs. Prentice has passed away. Who is this? The voice let out a low, humorless chuckle. It sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Passed away, huh? That is convenient. Very convenient. So who am I speaking to? The butler. I am her husband, I said automatically. The habit of 20 years ago kicking in. I mean her ex-husband. Lawrence. Lawrence, the voice repeated, testing the name. Lawrence, the loser. Yeah, Bradley mentioned you. Said you were out of the picture. Said you were dead weight. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. You know my son, know him. The voice laughed again, but this time there was no humor, only menace. Oh yeah, we know Bradley. We know him very well. We know where he eats. We know where he gets his custom suits tailored. We know that he likes to bet on horses in Hong Kong and tech startups that don't exist. Who is this? I demanded, trying to muster some authority. You can call me Mr. K, the voice said. And I represent a group of investors who are very disappointed in your son's performance. You see, Lawrence, your boy Bradley, has a problem with arithmetic. He keeps borrowing numbers he can't pay back. I closed my eyes. I leaned my forehead against the cold wall. Gambling. I knew it. But how bad was it? How much, I asked. Mr. K paused. I could hear the click of a lighter on the other end, then the slow exhale of smoke. $5 million. The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt. 5 million. That wasn't debt. That was a death sentence. He told us the money was coming. Mr. K continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. He told us his mommy was sick. He told us she was going to die and leave him the keys to the kingdom. We were patient, Lawrence. We waited. We let the interest pile up because we knew the Prentice estate was good for it. He gets the inheritance tomorrow, I said quickly. My instinct to protect my son overriding my anger. The reading of the will is tomorrow at noon. He will have the money. He better, Mr. K said, because our patience has expired. You tell pretty boy Bradley that we are done waiting. If we don't have 5 million in cash or a certified transfer by 1 p.m. tomorrow, the reading of the will is going to turn into a closed casket ceremony. You can't hurt him, I said, my voice rising. We won't just hurt him, Lawrence. We will erase him and tell him not to try to run. We have eyes on the mansion. We have eyes on his Porsche. We even have eyes on that little blonde wife of his. What is her name? Monica. Cute girl. It would be a shame if she had an accident. Leave them alone, I pleaded. I hated the sound of my own desperation. Then pay up, Mr. K snarled. Noon tomorrow. Or Bradley becomes a past tense verb. The line went dead. I sat there in the dim light of the motel room holding the silent phone. The buzzing of the neon sign outside seemed to get louder, drilling into my skull. $5 million. Suddenly, the cruelty of the afternoon made sense. The eviction. The way Bradley had thrown my clothes out the window. The way he had stolen my truck for scrap metal. The desperation in his eyes when he screamed at me to leave. He wasn't just a greedy, spoiled brat. He was a terrified animal caught in a trap of his own making. He was drowning, and he was climbing on top of me to try to get a breath of air. He needed that $30 million not for yachts or villas, but to buy his life back. He needed total control of the assets immediately because these people, Mr. K and his investors, didn't deal in probate courts or payment plans. They dealt in blood. That was why he forged Catherine's signature. That was why he had tried to leverage the company. He was digging a hole, and the deeper he got, the more frantic he became. And Monica. She knew, she had to know. Her live streaming, her obsession with the brand. It wasn't just vanity. It was a desperate attempt to keep up appearances, to show the world and these sharks that they were still powerful, still rich, still untouchable. I looked at the $100 bill on the nightstand again. My son was going to die tomorrow. If the will was read as I expected, if Solomon revealed that I was the trustee and Bradley got nothing, these men would kill him. They wouldn't care about the legalities. They would see it as a broken promise. I stood up and paced the small room. 3 steps to the window, 3 steps to the door. I could walk away. I could let nature take its course. Bradley had made his bed. He had treated me like garbage. He had disowned me. Why should I save him? Why should I step in front of a bullet for a man who wouldn't even give me a ride to the bus stop? Because he is my son. Because I remembered the day he was born. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway of the house I built. I remembered the way he used to look at me before the money, before the resentment, before I left to save him. I couldn't let him die. But I couldn't give him the money either. If I handed him $5 million, he would pay them off and then do it again. He would gamble the rest. He would destroy the company Catherine built. He would destroy himself. There had to be another way. I looked at the burner phone. Catherine knew. She must have known. That was why she gave me the phone. That was why she changed the will. She saw the wolves circling long before I did. She didn't leave me the money to make me rich. She left me the power to save our son from himself. I grabbed my jacket. It was still damp, but I put it on. I felt the weight of the letters in my pocket. I checked the time. It was getting late. The sharks were circling, and I had to walk into the lion's den with nothing but a torn suit and a piece of paper. I unlocked the door and pulled the chair away. The hallway was empty and quiet. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my son's life, and the only weapon I had was the truth. I stepped out into the night. I needed to get to Solomon's office. We had to change the strategy. We couldn't just reveal the will. We had to set a trap that would catch the sharks and save the boy. I started walking. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and black like oil. I didn't feel the pain in my knee anymore. I only felt the cold clarity of a man who has nothing left to lose. Tomorrow would be a bloodbath, but it would be my bloodbath, and I would determine who bled. The security guard at the service entrance of the Roth Tower was an old man named Marcus. He had deep lines etched into his face like a roadmap of a hard life. I knew him. 20 years ago, he worked the night shift at our first warehouse. He was one of the good ones, the kind of man who would share his thermos of coffee with you on a freezing December morning. Bradley had fired him 5 years ago for being too slow. My son called it streamlining assets. I called it cruelty. Marcus looked at my torn suit and my soaked shoes. He didn't sneer like the guard at the funeral. He didn't look away in disgust. He just tipped his cap and held the door open. "Mr. Prentice," he said softly. His voice was rough with age. "It is good to see you, sir. Mr. Roth left the freight elevator unlocked for you." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. I wanted to shake his hand, but my own hands were shaking too much from the cold and the adrenaline. I stepped into the freight elevator. It smelled of industrial cleaner and oil. It was a fitting carriage for a man who had been thrown away like trash. I watched the floor numbers tick upward. 10, 20, 30, 40. With every floor, I felt the weight of the last 2 decades pressing down on my chest. I wasn't just going up to a law office. I was ascending back into the world I had exiled myself from. The world of power. The world of money. The world where my son was currently drowning. The elevator doors slid open directly into the private sanctuary of Solomon Roth. The office was a cavern of shadows and mahogany. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering with millions of lights. It looked peaceful from up here. Down on the street where I had been walking, it was a different story. Solomon was standing by the window. He was a small man, sharp and precise like a surgical instrument. He wore a 3-piece suit that cost more than I had earned in the last 10 years combined. He didn't turn around when I entered. "You are late, Lawrence," he said. His voice was dry. "I had to walk," I replied. "My son repossessed my truck." Solomon turned then. His face was unreadable, But his eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had stared down union bosses and corporate raiders, softened just a fraction. "I heard," he said. He walked over to a crystal decanter sitting on a side table. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "No ice. Drink this. It is the 18-year-old single malt, the same bottle we opened the night we took the company public. Remember." I took the glass. My fingers were numb, but the glass felt heavy and solid. I remembered. That was 25 years ago. Catherine was alive. We were a team. We were unstoppable. And Bradley was just a teenager with a rebellious streak, not a monster with a gambling addiction. I took a sip. The whiskey burned a path down my throat, warming the cold knot of fear in my stomach. "He is in trouble, Solomon," I said. My voice was raspy. "Serious trouble. I just got a call. $5 million. They are going to kill him." Solomon didn't look surprised. He didn't gasp. He just nodded slowly and walked behind his massive desk. He sat down and gestured for me to take the leather chair opposite him. "I know, Lawrence," he said. "You know I asked." I leaned forward. "How can you know?" "Because I am the one cleaning up the mess," Solomon said. Or at least I was trying to until Catherine died. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. He slid it across the polished wood of the desk. "Open it." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, loan applications, promissory notes, and then something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a deed of trust. A lien against the main distribution center of Prentice Logistics, the heart of the company. I looked at the date. It was dated 3 days ago. "But this is impossible," I whispered. "Catherine was in a coma 3 days ago. She couldn't have signed this." "Look closer at the signature," Solomon said. I looked. It was Catherine's name. But the handwriting was wrong. Catherine had a bold, sweeping signature. This was tight, cramped, and shaky. It looked like someone trying desperately to copy a memory. "He forged it," I said. The realization made me feel sick. My son forged his dying mother's signature to pawn her life's work. "He tried," Solomon corrected. "The bank flagged it immediately. They called me. I stopped the transaction. But that didn't stop Bradley. When the legitimate banks said no, he went to the shadow lenders, the ones who don't check signatures, the ones who break legs." I closed the file. I couldn't look at it anymore. It was proof that my son wasn't just a failure. He was a criminal. "He is desperate, Solomon," I said. "He is terrified." "He is a parasite," Solomon said. His voice was hard now, lacking the sympathy it held a moment ago. "He has spent the last decade bleeding this company dry. Catherine covered for him. She paid his debts. She bailed him out. She thought she could love him into being a better man." "She was a mother," I said softly. "And you were a father," Solomon shot back. "And look where it got you." He stood up and walked around the desk. He leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. "Do you remember why we did it, Lawrence? Do you remember why you walked away 20 years ago?" I looked down at my torn trousers. I remembered. It was a memory I tried to keep locked away in the darkest corner of my mind because it hurt too much to look at. I remember I whispered. "Tell me," Solomon commanded. "Say it out loud. You need to hear it. You need to remember who you are before you walk into that room tomorrow." I took another long swallow of whiskey. "Bradley was 20, I said. My voice sounded distant, like I was telling a story about a stranger. He had racked up his first big debt, $200,000 on sports betting. The bookies were threatening to come after the company assets. They were going to sue. They were going to expose us." Solomon nodded, urging me to continue. "We couldn't let them touch the company." I continued. Prentice Logistics was just starting to grow. A scandal would have killed us. A lawsuit would have bankrupted us. So we came up with a plan. The divorce, Solomon said. The fake divorce, I corrected him. It wasn't real. Not in our hearts. But on paper, it had to be brutal. It had to be convincing. Catherine filed for divorce on grounds of financial incompetence, I said. We created a narrative. I was the bad guy. I was the one who made the bad investments. I was the loose cannon. We transferred all the assets solely to her name to protect them from my supposed creditors, which were actually Bradley's creditors. I took the fall. Solomon walked over to the window and looked out at the city. You took the fall, he repeated. You let the world believe you were a failure. You let your son believe you were a failure. You moved into a rental apartment. You drove a used truck. You worked odd jobs. You lived like a pauper so that the Prentice empire would remain secure in Catherine's hands, untouchable by the debts you claimed were yours. It worked, I said. The creditors backed off. The company survived. Bradley stayed out of jail. But at what cost? Solomon turned back to me. His eyes were fierce. Look at the cost, Lawrence. You lost your wife. You lost your home. And you lost your son. I didn't lose him, I argued weakly. I saved him. Did you? Solomon asked. He pointed at the file on the desk. Is this a saved man? A man who forges his dying mother's signature. A man who throws his father out on the street. A man who owes $5 million to murderers. I stayed silent. The truth of his words hung in the air like smoke. We made a mistake, Solomon said. You and Catherine. You loved him too much. You shielded him from the consequences of his actions. You taught him that if he messed up, Daddy would take the blame and Mommy would pay the bill. You created a monster, Lawrence. I put my head in my hands. I know. Solomon walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. It was a rare gesture of comfort from a man made of steel. Catherine knew it too, he said softly. In the end, she knew. She told me, I said. In those last weeks when she could still talk, she would sneak away to meet me at the park bench by the river. She would hold my hand and cry. She said she was afraid of what he had become. Solomon nodded. She was terrified that when she died, he would destroy everything she built. Everything you built together. She knew he was waiting for her to die, Lawrence. She saw it in his eyes. That is why she changed the will, I said. Yes, Solomon said. She came to me 6 months ago. She was frail, but her mind was sharp as a diamond. She said, Solomon, I have created a beast, and now I need to create a cage. He walked back to his desk and picked up the blue document I had seen earlier. This isn't just a will, Lawrence. This is a redemption strategy. Clause 17b. It creates the trust, but it does more than that. It strips the ownership of the assets from the beneficiary. Bradley doesn't own the money. The trust owns the money, and the trustee owns the trust. And I am the trustee, I said. Solomon smiled. You are the wall. You are the gatekeeper. You have absolute veto power. That means you can deny any request for funds for any reason. If Bradley wants to buy a car, you can say no. If he wants to pay off a gambling debt, you can say no. If he wants to buy a pack of gum, you can say no. I looked at the document. It felt heavy in my hands. So I control the money, I said. Solomon shook his head. No. You control him. For the first time in his life, Bradley will have to answer to someone. He will have to beg. He will have to work. He will have to prove he is worthy of the name Prentice. But the sharks, I said, if I say no, they will kill him. Solomon poured himself another drink. That is the beauty of the plan, Lawrence. The sharks don't want a dead Bradley. They want money. If Bradley has the money, they take it and he learns nothing. But if Bradley doesn't have the money, if he is penniless and powerless, he is no use to them as a target. They can't squeeze blood from a stone. But they will hurt him, I insisted. Maybe Solomon said. Or maybe they will realize that the only way to get their money is to negotiate with the one man who actually holds the keys. He pointed his glass at me. You. You are going to become the most powerful man in Bradley's life, Solomon said. You are going to be the only thing standing between him and the abyss. And you are going to have to make a choice, Lawrence. A choice harder than the one you made 20 years ago. What choice? You are going to have to choose between being his father and being his savior, Solomon said. A father gives his son what he wants. A savior gives him what he needs. And right now your son needs to be broken. He needs to hit rock bottom. He needs to be stripped of his arrogance, his entitlement, and his illusions. Solomon sat down and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow morning at that reading, you are going to shatter his world. He is going to hate you. Monica is going to scream. The press is going to go wild. But it is the only way. I looked at the whiskey in my glass. I saw my reflection in the amber liquid. I saw an old man, a tired man. But for the first time in 20 years, I didn't see a failure. I saw a man with a job to do. I drank the rest of the whiskey in one gulp. I set the glass down on the desk with a sharp clink. I am ready, Solomon, I said. Good, Solomon said. Then try to get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. He stood up and walked to the door. And Lawrence, he said, turning back. Yes. Catherine loved you. Until the very end. She told me to tell you that. She said the biggest regret of her life was that she couldn't tell the world that the man in the cheap apartment was the love of her life. I felt a lump form in my throat. I nodded, unable to speak. Solomon turned off the main lights, leaving the office illuminated only by the glow of the city outside. Sleep well, my friend, he said. Tomorrow we go to war. I lay down on the leather couch. I listened to the hum of the building. I thought about Catherine. I thought about the signature she was too weak to sign, and the forgery my son was too weak to resist making. I closed my eyes. I wasn't afraid anymore. The sadness was still there, deep and aching, but the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My son wanted his inheritance. Tomorrow he was going to get it, just not the one he expected. I left Solomon's office before the sun had fully risen. The city was still waking up, a gray haze hanging low over the streets, but my mind was sharp and clear. I had a few hours before the reading of the will at noon. There was one last thing I needed to do. One last ghost I needed to visit. Prentice Logistics. It was located in the industrial park on the south side of the city. Catherine and I had bought the land 30 years ago when it was just a swamp. We drained it, poured the concrete, and built the first warehouse with our own hands. It was the body of our marriage, just as our home had been the heart. I didn't take a taxi. I walked the last mile, enjoying the morning air that smelled of diesel and wet earth. When the massive steel structure came into view, my chest tightened. The blue Prentice logo was faded on the side of the building, but the parking lot was full. Trucks were idling at the loading docks. The business was alive. I couldn't walk in the front door. The security scanners had been updated years ago, and my face was probably flagged in the system, just like at the funeral. But I knew this building better than the architect who designed it. I knew about the maintenance door behind the generator room that had a faulty latch. Catherine always meant to fix it, but never got around to it. I slipped around the back. The latch clicked open with a familiar heavy thud. I stepped inside. The noise hit me first. The beep of forklifts, the shouted orders, the hum of conveyor belts. It was the music of my life. I moved through the shadows of the generator room and climbed the narrow metal staircase that led to the catwalks above the warehouse floor. From up here, I could see everything. Acres of shelving stacked high with crates, an army of workers in orange vests moving like ants. It was a well-oiled machine. But something was wrong. The rhythm was off. There was a knot of people gathered near the main floor office. The work had stopped in that sector. I crept closer, crouching behind a stack of air ducts. I looked down. Bradley was there. He was standing on a wooden pallet, treating it like a stage. He was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue and immaculate, completely unaffected by the rain that had soaked me the day before. Next to him stood two men I didn't recognize, holding clipboards. They looked like undertakers. Standing in front of Bradley was a line of about 20 people. I squinted. My heart dropped. I knew them. There was Stanley, the foreman who had been with us since day one. He had lost 3 fingers on a press machine back in '95, and Catherine had paid for his kids' college tuition. There was Mrs. Higgins, the head of inventory, who used to bring Bradley homemade cookies when he visited the office as a boy. There was Old Man Miller, the mechanic who could fix a diesel engine with a paperclip. These weren't just employees. They were the backbone of the company. They were the family we built when our own family started to crumble. Bradley clapped his hands. The sound echoed in the vast space. "Listen up, everyone," he shouted. His voice was loud, bouncing off the metal roof. "We are making some changes, effective immediately." Stanley stepped forward. He held his hard hat in his hands. His gray hair was matted with sweat. "Mr. Bradley, sir," he said. His voice was respectful but firm. "We are in the middle of the morning rush. If we stop now, the shipments to the coast are going to be late. Your mother always said the morning rush is sacred." "My mother is dead," Stanley Bradley snapped. He didn't even look at the man. And her way of doing things died with her. "This company is bloated. It is bleeding cash because of sentimental overhead." He gestured to the men with clipboards. "These gentlemen are auditors from Apex Corp." I gasped. Apex. They were our biggest competitor. They were a corporate giant that had been trying to buy us out for a decade. Catherine hated them. She called them vultures. She swore she would burn the warehouse to the ground before she let Apex paint their logo on our trucks. Apex, Bradley continued, is acquiring Prentice Logistics this afternoon. As soon as the will is read and the title transfers to me, I am signing the sale papers. A murmur of shock went through the line of workers. "Sale?" Stanley asked. "But Mr. Bradley, this is a family business. We have contracts. We have pensions." "Not anymore," Bradley said, cold as ice. "Apex is buying the assets, the trucks, the inventory, the client list, and the real estate. They are not buying the liabilities." He pointed a finger at the line of people. "And you people are liabilities. You are expensive. You are old. And you are redundant. Apex has their own staff. They don't need a one-handed foreman or a senile inventory clerk." Mrs. Higgins began to cry. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "But Bradley, I have 2 years until retirement. Your mother promised." "My mother made a lot of bad promises," Bradley interrupted. "Like promising to love a loser like my father. Look where that got her. Alone and dead." He checked his gold watch. "You have 15 minutes to clean out your lockers. Leave your badges on the desk. Security will escort you out. No severance. The company is technically insolvent as of this morning, so there is no money for handouts. Consider your years of employment your reward." He turned to the Apex auditors. "Is that enough to clear the books?" he asked, his voice dropping, but still audible from my perch. One of the auditors nodded. "It helps. Getting rid of the high seniority salaries makes the balance sheet look much sexier for the acquisition. We can have the check ready by 2 p.m. 30 million minus the debt assumption. Perfect, Bradley said. He rubbed his hands together. I need that cash wire transferred today. I have expenses. Expenses. He meant the debt. He meant the sharks. He was gutting the company. He was firing the people who had raised him, who had built his fortune just to make the numbers look good for a fire sale. He wasn't just selling the business. He was erasing the legacy. He was erasing Catherine. Stanley didn't move. He stood his ground. This isn't right, he said. Your father wouldn't allow this. Lawrence built this place too. Bradley laughed. It was a bark of derision. My father is a ghost, Stanley. He is a bum sleeping in a gutter somewhere. He has no say. I am the king now, and the king says get out. He waved to the security guards, the new ones I didn't recognize. Get them out of here. If they loiter, call the cops for trespassing. I watched from above as the security guards moved in. I watched Stanley lower his head, defeated. I watched Mrs. Higgins being led away, weeping. I watched the lifeblood of Prentice Logistics being drained onto the concrete floor. My hands gripped the railing of the catwalk until the metal cut into my palms. I felt a tear run down my cheek. Not for me, not for the humiliation I had suffered, but for them. For the loyalty that was being repaid with betrayal. And for Catherine. She had worked until her last breath to keep this family together, to keep this company safe. She had sacrificed her marriage, her happiness, everything for this boy. And he was destroying it in less than 24 minutes. The last shred of doubt I had vanished. The small flickering flame of hope that maybe I could talk sense into him, that maybe I could guide him, was extinguished. Bradley wasn't a misguided child. He wasn't just a desperate victim of gambling. He was cruel. He was rotten to the core. He didn't care about anyone but himself. Solomon was right. I had to make a choice. Father or savior? Looking down at the empty floor where my friends had just stood, I made my choice. I wasn't going to be his father anymore. A father protects. A father forgives. I was going to be the trustee. And the trustee had a job to do. I pulled myself back from the railing. I moved silently through the shadows back toward the generator room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see anymore. I exited the building into the bright, harsh sunlight of the morning. I checked the time. It was 10 a.m. 2 hours until the reading. I walked to the nearest bus stop. I sat on the bench and waited. I looked at my hands. They were dirty with dust from the catwalk. I wiped them on my trousers. No more mercy, I whispered to the empty street. Bradley wanted to sell the company. He wanted to fire the faithful. He wanted to erase the past. He was about to find out that the past has a way of coming back. And when it does, it doesn't bring a severance check. It brings a reckoning. I closed my eyes and pictured the blue document in Solomon's office. The veto power. Bradley wanted to be king. Fine. I was about to show him that a king is nothing without a kingdom, and I held the keys to the castle. The iron gates of the Prentice estate were thrown wide open like the mouth of a glutton waiting to be fed. I sat in the back of Solomon Roth's black sedan as we crunched over the gravel driveway. I remembered laying this gravel myself 30 years ago. I remembered Catherine kneeling beside me, her hands covered in dirt, planting the rows of hydrangeas that lined the path. Now those hydrangeas were trampled, flattened under the tires of a dozen luxury cars that cost more than my entire lifetime earnings. It did not look like a house of mourning. It looked like a carnival. A news van was parked on the front lawn, its satellite dish extended toward the sky like a begging hand. Reporters were smoking cigarettes by the fountain, flicking their ashes into the water where Catherine used to keep her prize koi fish. The front doors were open and music was spilling out. Not somber classical music or a respectful silence. It was loud thumping bass that rattled the window panes of the car. Solomon parked the car near the garages, away from the cameras. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were hard behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you ready for this, Lawrence?" he asked. I looked at the house. It felt like walking into a burning building, knowing you were the only one with a fire extinguisher. "I am ready," I said. We got out. I smoothed the front of my torn jacket. The fresh white shirt Solomon had given me felt stark against the frayed gray wool of my suit. It was a contrast of dignity and decay. We walked to the front entrance. A security guard, a different one from the funeral, blocked the way. He held a clipboard and wore an earpiece. He looked me up and down with a sneer that seemed practiced. "Name," he barked. Solomon stepped forward. "Solomon Roth, executor of the estate, and Mr. Prentice." The guard hesitated. He looked at his list. He looked at the earpiece. "The son said no vagrants," he muttered. "He is a beneficiary," Solomon said, his voice like a whip crack. "Step aside or I will have you removed for obstruction of legal proceedings." The guard grunted and stepped back. We walked into the foyer. The smell hit me first. Expensive perfume, stale champagne, and the underlying metallic scent of greed. The grand hallway was packed. There were at least 50 people inside. I scanned the room. I recognized a few faces from the business pages. Competitors. Vultures circling the carcass of Prentice Logistics waiting to pick the bones clean. There were women in cocktail dresses who looked like they belonged on a runway, not at a reading of a will. They held crystal flutes of mimosa and laughed with their heads thrown back, exposing long, elegant necks. But it was the other group that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Standing near the walls away from the sunlight were 5 men. They wore suits that were too shiny and too tight. They didn't hold drinks. They didn't smile. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them, their eyes scanning the room with the cold calculation of butchers assessing a herd. The sharks. These were the men Bradley owed. They were here to collect. They were the executioners waiting for the signal. I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. It was Monica. She was radiant in a way that made my stomach turn. She wore a dress of crimson silk that clung to her body like a second skin. It was a celebration dress, a victory lap in fabric form. Her blonde hair was piled high on her head, and her makeup was flawless. "Well, if it isn't the ghost of Christmas past," she said. Her voice was loud, designed to draw attention. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume was overpowering, a sickly sweet floral that masked something rotten. "I thought we told you to stay in your hole, Lawrence," she said. Her eyes raked over my torn suit. "God, you look pathetic. Did you sleep in a dumpster?" I ignored her insult. My eyes were fixed on her neck. Around her throat, resting against her collarbone, was a necklace, a teardrop sapphire surrounded by a halo of diamonds. My breath caught in my throat. "That is Catherine's," I whispered. Monica touched the stone with a manicured fingernail. She smiled a cruel, satisfied smile. "It was Catherine's," she corrected. "Now it is mine. It goes perfectly with the dress, don't you think?" I felt a physical pain in my chest. I had bought that necklace for Catherine 25 years ago. It was the first real piece of jewelry I ever gave her. We had just landed our first major contract with the shipping unions. We celebrated with pizza and cheap wine, and I surprised her with the box. She had cried. She wore it to every major event for the rest of her life. She called it her lucky charm. And now it was hanging around the neck of the woman who was helping to destroy her legacy. "You have no right to wear that," I said. My voice was low, trembling with suppressed rage. That meant something to her. "It means money to me," Monica laughed. She turned to a group of women standing nearby. "Hey girls, look, my father-in-law thinks he is the fashion police. Can you believe the audacity?" The women giggled, covering their mouths with their hands. They looked at me with pity and amusement, as if I were a performing animal. "Bradley wants you in the back," Monica said, turning back to me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure disdain. "He said he doesn't want your poverty infecting the VIPs. She pointed a long finger toward the far corner of the massive living room. "There. That is your spot." I looked where she was pointing. In a room filled with velvet armchairs, antique sofas, and mahogany benches, there was a single white plastic lawn chair. It was set up in the corner near the kitchen door next to a large potted fern. It was isolated. It was ridiculous. It was a throne of shame. "Go on," Monica shooed me as if I were a stray dog. "Sit. Stay. And don't speak unless spoken to." Solomon stepped forward, his face red with anger, but I put a hand on his arm. "It is fine, Solomon," I said. "Let them have their fun." I walked through the crowd. The guests parted for me, pulling their expensive clothes away, as if I were contagious. I could hear their whispers. "Is that him, the ex-husband? How embarrassing. Why is he even here?" I reached the plastic chair and sat down. The plastic was cold and flimsy. It creaked under my weight. From this vantage point, I could see the entire room. I was the spectator at my own execution. Then the music stopped. The chatter died down. At the top of the grand staircase, Bradley appeared. He paused for effect, letting the silence build. He looked like a prince in a fairy tale. His suit was midnight blue, tailored to perfection. His hair was slicked back. He held a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister. He owned the room. He owned the moment. He reached the bottom of the stairs and spread his arms wide. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed. His voice was charismatic, charming, and utterly hollow. "Thank you for coming to celebrate the life and legacy of my mother, Catherine Prentice." He took a sip of his drink and winked at someone in the front row. "Mom was a force of nature," he continued. "She built this empire from nothing. And today we honor her by ensuring that her empire continues to grow." He walked toward the center of the room where a large antique table had been set up for the lawyers. He passed by the group of sharks standing against the wall. I saw him make a subtle gesture, a quick nod, a flash of his eyes. One of the men in the cheap suits, the biggest one with a scar running through his eyebrow, nodded back. He tapped his wrist where a watch should be. The message was clear. "Time is up. Pay us." Bradley swallowed hard. For a split second, his mask slipped. I saw the terror underneath. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. But he recovered instantly, plastering the smile back onto his face. He turned and looked directly at me, sitting in my plastic chair in the corner. "And I want to welcome a special guest," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "My father, Lawrence." Every head in the room turned to look at me. The cameras flashed, blinding me for a moment. "Dad," Bradley said, walking toward me. He stopped 10 feet away, treating me like a zoo exhibit. "I am glad you could make it. I know it must have been a long walk." The crowd chuckled. "I wanted to make sure you were here to see this," Bradley said. "I wanted you to see what success looks like. I wanted you to see what happens when you stick around and fight instead of running away when things get tough." He was rewriting history. He was painting me as the coward and himself as the hero. I said nothing. I just looked at him. I looked at the fear hiding behind his arrogance. Bradley turned back to the crowd. "Today is a new beginning," he announced. "Prentice Logistics is entering a new era, an era of bold moves and big profits. And to my friends in the back," he nodded at the sharks, "again, do not worry. Everyone gets what they deserve today." Monica walked up to him and kissed him on the cheek. She whispered something in his ear, and they both laughed. She touched the sapphire necklace again, making sure it caught the light. Solomon stood up from the table. He cleared his throat. The sound was dry and authoritative, cutting through Bradley's performance. Shall we proceed, Mr. Prentice? Solomon asked. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. By all means, Solomon. Read the damn thing. Let's get the ink dry so we can pop the real champagne. Bradley sat down in a high-backed velvet chair next to Monica. He crossed his legs. He looked relaxed. He looked victorious. I sat in my plastic chair. I gripped the armrests. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. The stage was set. The vultures were fed. The victim was in the corner. But they had forgotten one thing. The script had been written by Catherine, and she always saved the plot twist for the very end. Solomon Roth adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and smoothed the heavy parchment of the will with a hand that looked carved from marble. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the untouched drinks on the sidebar. Even the sharks standing against the wall seemed to hold their collective breath, their eyes fixed on the lawyer's lips, waiting for the signal that would determine whether my son lived or died. I sat in my plastic chair, my hands resting on my knees, feeling the rough fabric of my torn trousers against my skin. I watched Bradley. He was leaning forward in his velvet chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He looked like a man about to hear a jury verdict, but in his mind he had already acquitted himself. Solomon began to read. His voice was a dry monotone that stripped the emotion out of the words, leaving only the raw legal power behind them. Article 3 regarding the primary residential estate located at 4500 Highland Drive, including all furnishings, artwork, and grounds. I, Catherine Prentice, hereby bequeath this property in its entirety to my son Bradley Prentice. The air in the room seemed to shatter. Yes, Bradley screamed. It was a primal sound, a roar of pure, unadulterated greed, releasing itself after years of suppression. He jumped up from his chair, his arms raised in the air like a prize fighter who had just scored a knockout. He grabbed Monica and pulled her into a kiss that was aggressive and possessive. "Did you hear that, baby?" he shouted, pulling away and looking wild-eyed at the crowd. "The house, the mansion. It is mine. It is all mine." The crowd erupted into polite applause. The women in the cocktail dresses clapped with dainty hands while the business rivals nodded with grudging respect. They were witnessing the transfer of power, the coronation of the new king. Solomon waited for the noise to die down. He didn't look up. He didn't smile. He just turned a page, the sound crisp and loud in the sudden silence. Article 4 regarding the private collection of vintage automobiles stored in the climate-controlled garage, including the 1962 Ferrari and the 1955 Mercedes-Benz. I hereby bequeath these vehicles in their entirety to my son Bradley Prentice. Boom, Bradley yelled, slamming his hand onto the antique table. The Ferrari. I knew it. She saved it for me. He turned to a group of his friends, young men in expensive suits who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. Road trip to Vegas. Boys, he shouted, we are taking the collection. First class all the way. Monica was laughing a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She was already mentally redecorating the house, already planning which cars she would drive to her yoga classes. She looked at me in my corner and stuck out her tongue, a childish gesture of victory. Solomon continued relentlessly. Article 5 regarding the personal investment portfolio held at Sovereign Bank, including all stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, with a current valuation of $12 million. I hereby bequeath this portfolio in its entirety to my son, Bradley Prentice. $12 million, Bradley gasped. He looked like he might faint. He grabbed the back of his chair to steady himself. 12 million liquid, plus the house, plus the cars. He looked at the sharks standing by the wall. The fear that had been lurking behind his eyes evaporated completely, replaced by a terrifying arrogance. He snapped his fingers at them. You, he barked, pointing at the man with the scar. Come here. The shark didn't move at first. He looked at Bradley with cold, dead eyes. But then he glanced at Solomon, who gave a barely perceptible nod, confirming the validity of the bequest. The shark stepped forward, moving with the heavy grace of a predator. Bradley reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He slammed it onto the table, pushing aside a priceless vase. He uncapped a gold fountain pen. "What is the number?" Bradley asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "5 million, right? Plus your vigorish. Let us call it 5.5, just to make you go away faster." He scribbled furiously on the check. He tore it out with a violent rip. He held the check up between two fingers, waving it in the shark's face. "Here," Bradley said. $5.5 million, drawn on the sovereign bank account. You can cash it the second the probate clears tomorrow morning. Now take this trash and get out of my house." The shark took the check. He looked at it. He looked at Bradley. He didn't say thank you. He just folded the piece of paper, slipped it into his pocket, and turned to his men. He jerked his head toward the door. They turned and left. The heavy oak doors closed behind them. Bradley let out a long breath, a laugh bubbling up from his chest. He was free. He had survived. He had paid off the devil, and he still had millions left over. He was invincible. He poured himself another glass of champagne, filling it until it overflowed onto the expensive Persian rug. He didn't care. It was his rug now. He could burn it if he wanted to. He raised the glass to the room. To Catherine Prentice, he toasted, mocking the solemnity of the occasion. "Thanks for the cash, Mom. Sorry you aren't here to see me spend it. But do not worry, Monica and I will spend it well." He downed the drink in one gulp. Then he lowered the glass, and his eyes found me. The room followed his gaze. The cameras turned. I was the only dark spot in his bright, shiny world, the only loose end. Bradley smiled. It was a smile I didn't recognize. It wasn't the smile of my son. It was the smile of a stranger who enjoyed inflicting pain. He walked toward me slowly, savoring the moment. The crowd parted again, giving him a wide berth. He stopped a few feet away from my plastic chair, towering over me. "Well, Lawrence," he said, using my first name like a curse word. "What do you think? Quite a haul, isn't it?" I looked up at him. I didn't stand. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of looking me in the eye on equal footing. "It is a lot of money, Bradley," I said quietly. "It is everything," Bradley corrected me. "It is the whole world. And you know what the best part is?" He leaned down, getting right in my face. I could smell the expensive alcohol on his breath. "The best part is knowing that you get absolutely nothing." He straightened up and turned to the crowd, projecting his voice like an actor on a stage. "You all know the story," he announced. "You know how this man abandoned us. You know how he walked out when things got tough, leaving my mother to build this empire alone. He thought he was too good for the struggle. He thought he could just come back when the work was done and collect a paycheck. Lies. All lies." But the crowd nodded, eating it up. They loved a villain, and Bradley was painting a masterpiece. "Well, Dad," Bradley said, turning back to me, spitting the word dad like poison. "You gambled and you lost. You thought Mom still loved you. You thought she would leave you a little nest egg out of pity, but she didn't. She knew who you really were. A coward. A leech." He reached into his pocket. "But I am a generous man," Bradley said. "I am a philanthropist, and I hate to see the elderly suffer. So I am going to give you your inheritance myself." He pulled his hand out of his pocket. He was holding a single crumpled dollar bill. He flicked his wrist. The dollar bill fluttered through the air, drifting slowly down until it landed on my lap. "There," Bradley said. "Buy yourself a soda. Or maybe save it up for a new suit. That one smells like failure." The room erupted in laughter. Cruel, sycophantic laughter. Monica was cackling, filming the dollar bill on my knees, zooming in for her followers. "That is your portion, old man," Bradley sneered. "Now take it and get out." Security, escort this trespasser off my property. 2 guards started to move toward me. I picked up the dollar bill. I smoothed it out. George Washington looked back at me, stern and silent. I looked at Solomon Roth. The lawyer had not moved. He had not smiled. He had not joined in the laughter. He sat behind the table, his hands folded on top of the blue document. He watched Bradley with an expression of clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting bacteria. Bradley turned to Solomon. "We are done here, right, Solomon? Wrap it up. I have a party to start." Solomon cleared his throat. The sound was small, but it cut through the noise of the room instantly. "Please take your seat, Mr. Prentice," Solomon said. His voice was calm, level, and utterly commanding. Bradley frowned. "Why? You read the will. I got the house, the cars, the money. It is over." "I have read Article 5, Solomon said. "There are 20 articles in this document." Bradley rolled his eyes and groaned. "Oh, come on. What is left? Her porcelain cat collection, her old clothes. Give them to the maid. I don't care. Just sign the transfer papers for the cash." "Sit down," Solomon repeated. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bradley hesitated. He looked at Monica, who shrugged. He looked at the crowd. He huffed an annoyed breath. "Fine," Bradley said, throwing his hands up. "Read the rest of the garbage. But make it fast. My guests are getting thirsty." He walked back to his velvet chair and threw himself into it, slouching like a bored teenager. He winked at Monica. He spun the empty champagne glass in his fingers. Solomon waited until Bradley was seated. He waited until the room was absolutely silent. He waited until every eye was focused on him. Then he reached out and turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was loud. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. Solomon adjusted his glasses. He looked directly at Bradley. "Article 6. Solomon read, "Regarding the distribution of the assets listed in Articles 1 through 5. Bradley frowned. "Distribution? You just said they were bequeathed to me." "I said they were bequeathed," Solomon said. "I did not say they were distributed." He looked back at the document. "The bequest of all assets listed above, including the residential estate, the automotive collection, and the investment portfolio, is subject to the terms and conditions of the Prentice Family Trust." Trust. Bradley sat up straighter. "What trust? Mom never talked about a trust. She created it 6 months ago," Solomon said. Whatever, Bradley waved his hand. "So the money is in a trust." "Fine. I am the beneficiary. I just sign the paper and move the money to my personal account, right? That is how trusts work." "Not this one," Solomon said. He looked at the crowd. Catherine Prentice was concerned about the longevity of her legacy. She wanted to ensure that her fortune was not squandered. Therefore, she included a specific clause regarding the management of the trust. He paused. "Clause 17b. Bradley tapped his foot impatiently. "Okay, Clause 17b, what does it say? That I have to take a financial literacy course. Fine. I will take the course. Just give me the money." Solomon shook his head. Clause 17b states that the beneficiary, Bradley Prentice, shall have no direct access to the principal or the interest of the trust assets. Bradley froze. "What did you say?" "He shall have no direct access," Solomon repeated. "Instead, all distributions for living expenses, business ventures, and debts shall be at the sole discretion of the trustee." Bradley stood up. His face was flushing red. "Trustee? What trustee? You mean the bank?" "I can handle the bank. I know people at Sovereign." "It is not a bank," Solomon said. "It is a private trustee, an individual appointed by Catherine Prentice to act as the guardian of the estate." Bradley laughed nervously. a guardian, like a babysitter. Who is it? Is it you, Solomon? Are you the trustee? Because if it is you, we can work something out. I will pay you a fee. A big fee. Just sign the checks. Solomon smiled. It was a small, thin smile. I am the executor Bradley. I am not the trustee. Catherine wanted someone who knew the family. Someone who understood the history of this money. Someone she trusted with her life. Who Bradley screamed. He kicked the antique table. Who is it? Tell me his name so I can fire him. You cannot fire him, Solomon said softly. The trustee has a lifetime appointment, and he holds absolute veto power. That means he can deny any request you make without explanation and without appeal. He controls the house you are sitting in. He controls the car you drove here. He controls the check you just wrote to those gentlemen who just left. Bradley went pale. The check. The $5 million check. If the trustee does not approve that transaction, Solomon said, the check will bounce tomorrow morning. And I believe those gentlemen will be very unhappy. Who is it? Bradley roared. His voice cracked. He looked wild, panicked. Solomon closed the folder. He clasped his hands together. He looked past Bradley. He looked past the shocked crowd. He looked past Monica, who was standing with her mouth open, her phone lowered. He looked at the corner of the room. The trustee, Solomon said, is Mr. Lawrence Prentice. The name hung in the air. Bradley turned slowly. His neck seemed stiff. He looked at the plastic chair. He looked at the torn suit. He looked at the dollar bill on my knee. No, he whispered. Yes, Solomon said. No, Bradley shouted. That is impossible. He is a bum. He is a nobody. Mom hated him. She wouldn't give him control of a lemonade stand, let alone $30 million. She didn't give him the money, Solomon said. She gave him you. I stood up. The plastic chair scraped against the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. I brushed the dollar bill off my knee. It fluttered to the floor, landing face down. I walked forward. My knee didn't hurt anymore. My back was straight. I felt the weight of the letters in my pocket. The letters that proved Catherine's love. I walked past the reporters who were frantically snapping pictures. I walked past the investors who were staring at me with new eyes, assessing, calculating. I walked past Monica, who took a step back, clutching her stolen necklace as if it burned her skin. I walked right up to Bradley. He was trembling. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, stripped away, leaving only a terrified boy in a suit that was too expensive for him. I looked him in the eye. He looked at the tear in my jacket. He looked at the dirt on my shoes. You, he stammered. You are the trustee. I am, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as the grave. But you have nothing, Bradley said. I took your truck. I took your apartment. I gave you $1. I know, I said. And I thank you for that $1, Bradley. It reminded me of something important. What Bradley whispered. It reminded me that value isn't about what you have in your pocket, I said. It is about what you have in your spine. I reached out and took the champagne glass from his hand. His fingers were limp. He didn't resist. I placed the glass on the table next to the legal documents. Hello, son, I said. We need to talk about your allowance. And I think the first item of business is that check you just wrote. Bradley's eyes widened in horror. You have to approve it. They will kill me. I looked at him. I looked at the fear. I know, I said. I let the silence stretch. I let him feel the weight of his life hanging in the balance. I let him realize that the man he had thrown in the mud was the only thing standing between him and a violent end. So I continued leaning in close so only he could hear. I suggest you ask me nicely. And Bradley, He gulped. Yes. Start by picking up that dollar. The silence in the grand hall was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the open doors and the shallow, terrified breathing of my son. He looked at the crumpled dollar bill on the floor. Then he looked at me, and then he looked at Solomon Roth. His eyes darted back and forth like a trapped animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. You, Bradley whispered. His voice was a dry croak. You are the trustee. That is impossible. You are a bankrupt old man. You don't have a pot to piss in. He turned to the crowd, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking in a grinder. Did you hear that? Everyone, he shouted, spreading his arms in a gesture of manic disbelief. The lawyer made a joke. My father, the man who lives above a laundromat, is in charge of a $30 million estate. It is a prank. Good one, Solomon. You really had me going. He looked at Monica, expecting her to laugh with him. But Monica wasn't laughing. She was staring at me, her hand clutching her throat, where Catherine's necklace lay. She had done the math. She knew Solomon Roth didn't make jokes. Bradley turned back to the table. He grabbed the blue document, his hands shaking so badly he nearly ripped the paper. Show me, he demanded. Show me where it says that. It is a lie. It has to be a forgery. Solomon Roth didn't move to stop him. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped over his briefcase, his expression one of bored detachment. It is Article 6, Section B, Bradley Solomon said, his voice cutting through Bradley's hysteria like a scalpel. But I suggest you keep reading. You stopped at the name. You didn't read the conditions. Bradley scanned the page, his eyes moving frantically. I watched him reading. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a wax statue. Solomon stood up then. He walked around the table and gently took the document from Bradley's numb fingers. He smoothed the page and looked out at the audience, at the reporters, who were now recording every second, at the investors, who were checking their watches, and at the sharks who were checking their pockets for weapons. Allow me to clarify the terms of the Prentice Family Trust, Solomon announced. His voice boomed, filling the cavernous room. Since there seems to be some confusion regarding the nature of this inheritance, let us be precise. He adjusted his glasses and began to read, not the summary, but the fine print, the steel bars of the cage Catherine had built. Clause 17C, regarding the powers of the trustee, Solomon read, the trustee shall have absolute and sole discretion over the distribution of all funds. This power is plenary and not subject to judicial review. The trustee may deny any request for funds if in his sole judgment the expenditure does not align with the values of the Prentice legacy. Bradley scoffed. Values? What values? Poverty. Failure. Solomon ignored him and continued reading, his voice dropping an octave, becoming darker, more ominous. Clause 17D, regarding the prohibition of debt assumption. The trust shall not under any circumstances be used to service, satisfy, or guarantee any debts incurred by the beneficiary prior to the execution of this will. This includes, but is not limited to, gambling debts, personal loans, or liens obtained through fraudulent means. The room gasped. It was a direct hit. A sniper shot aimed squarely at the men standing against the wall. I looked at the shark with the scar. He had stiffened. He was looking at Bradley with eyes that promised violence. The check Bradley had just written, the $5.5 million lifesaver, was now worthless. It was a piece of paper backed by nothing but air. Bradley felt it too. He spun around to face Solomon. You can't do that, he screamed. That is my money. I can spend it how I want. If I want to pay off a loan, I can pay off a loan. Not with trust assets, Solomon said calmly. The trust is a separate legal entity, Bradley. You don't own it. You are merely the named beneficiary. You have an expectation of benefit, not a right of possession. And according to this document, The trustee is forbidden from paying your gambling debts. If Lawrence were to sign that check, he would be violating his fiduciary duty. He would be breaking the law. Solomon looked at me. And Lawrence is a very law-abiding man. Bradley turned to me. Sweat was pouring down his face, ruining his expensive makeup. "Dad," he said. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "Dad, you have to sign it. You don't understand. These men, they aren't banks. They will kill me." I looked at him. I looked at the terror in his eyes. It was real. "I know," I said softly. "Then sign it," he begged. He fell to his knees. It wasn't a gesture of humility, it was a collapse of spirit. "Just sign the check, and then you can have the trust. You can have the power. I don't care. Just save me." I looked down at him. I thought about the truck he stole. I thought about the employees he fired. I thought about the $5 million that would vanish into the pockets of criminals if I lifted my pen. Solomon cleared his throat. "There is more," Solomon said. He turned the page. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Clause 18. The conduct clause. Bradley looked up from the floor. Conduct. The beneficiary. Solomon read, "Shall receive a monthly stipend for living expenses. However, this stipend is contingent upon the beneficiary maintaining a lifestyle of gainful employment and moral rectitude." "Gainful employment," Bradley whispered. "I am the CEO." "Not anymore," Solomon said. "The trust controls the majority shares of Prentice Logistics, and the trustee has the power to appoint or remove the CEO. He looked at me. "Lawrence." I stepped forward. I looked at the crowd of people who had watched me being humiliated just an hour ago. "As of this moment," I said, my voice steady and strong, "I am removing Bradley Prentice as CEO of Prentice Logistics, effective immediately. The sale to Apex Corp is canceled. The termination notices given to the staff this morning are void." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Stanley, the foreman, standing by the door. He had snuck in. He pumped his fist in the air. "You can't fire me," Bradley shrieked. "I am the heir." "I just did," I said. "And as for your stipend," Solomon read the final nail in the coffin. "The monthly stipend shall be set at an amount equal to the current minimum wage indexed for inflation to ensure the beneficiary learns the value of $1. "Minimum wage!" Monica gasped. She looked like she was going to be sick. That is poverty. We can't live on that. I spend more than that on my hair." "Then I suggest you learn to do your own hair, my dear," Solomon said, closing the folder with a final decisive snap. The reality settled over the room like a shroud. The party was over. The champagne was warm. The king was dethroned. Bradley knelt on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of his expectations. He looked at the sharks. They were already moving toward the door, their faces grim. They knew they weren't getting paid today, and they knew Bradley was no longer a golden goose. He was a lame duck. Bradley crawled toward me. He grabbed the hem of my torn trousers. "Dad, please. You can't let them leave. If they leave without the money, I am dead. You know I am dead." I looked down at him. I felt a pang of pity, a sharp ache in my chest. He was my son, but he was also a monster of my own making. And monsters aren't tamed with cookies. They are tamed with cages. "I am not going to pay them, Bradley," I said. His eyes widened in horror. "You are going to let them kill me." "No," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. I held the phone up so everyone could see. "I am reporting an extortion attempt," I said to the operator, my voice echoing in the hall. "There are 5 men at the Prentice estate attempting to collect an illegal gambling debt. They are armed. and they have threatened the life of my son." The sharks didn't wait. The moment they heard me speak, they turned and ran. They melted into the crowd, pushing past the terrified guests, sprinting for the exits. They were predators, but they were also cowards. They wouldn't fight the police for a debt that was now public record. Bradley watched them go. He slumped against my leg, sobbing. "They will come back," he wept. "They will come back." "Maybe," I said, "but not today. And when they do, you won't be here." "Where will I be?" he asked, looking up at me like a child. I pointed to the door where the police sirens were already wailing in the distance. "You are going to prison, son." "Prison," he gasped. "For fraud," I said. "For forging your mother's signature. I am turning over those documents to the district attorney. You would send your own son to jail." "It is the only place you are safe, Bradley," I said. "In jail, the sharks can't touch you. In jail, you will have a bed and 3 meals a day. It is more than you left me with yesterday." I pulled my leg away from his grasp. I looked at the dollar bill still lying face down on the floor. "Pick it up," I said. Bradley looked at the dollar. He looked at me. He saw the face of the man he had thrown away, the man he had underestimated. He saw the trustee. With a trembling hand, he reached out. He picked up the crumpled dollar bill. "Keep it," I said. "That is your inheritance. It is the first dollar of your new life. Try not to gamble it away." I turned to Solomon. "Mr. Roth, I believe we have a company to save." Solomon smiled, a genuine warm smile. "After you, Mr. Prentice." I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back at the weeping man on the floor, or the woman clutching her stolen necklace. I walked past the stunned guests, past the flashing cameras, and out into the fresh air. My knee still hurt. My suit was still torn. But I stood straighter than I had in 20 years. I had lost my son to save him. It was a terrible price. But as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew Catherine was watching, and I knew she approved. The king was dead. Long live the trustee. The room was clearing out fast. The guests who had come to drink champagne and witness the coronation of a king were now scrambling over each other to escape the scene of a disaster. The sharks had fled, vanishing like smoke the moment I dialed those 3 numbers, but the stench of their cologne and their menace still lingered in the air. The police sirens were wailing in the distance, getting louder with every heartbeat, a soundtrack to the wreckage of the Prentice legacy. Bradley was still on the floor, clutching the leg of the antique table, weeping like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone. But there was one person who hadn't moved. One person who was still standing amidst the ruins of the party, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a reset button. Monica. She stood there in her crimson dress, the one she had worn to dance on my grave. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't looking at Bradley. She wasn't looking at the fleeing guests. She was looking at me. And in her eyes, I didn't see fear. I saw fury. Pure, unadulterated entitlement that refused to die even when the world was burning down around her. She took a step toward me. Her high heels clicked sharply on the marble floor, echoing in the emptying hall. "You think this is over?" she hissed. Her voice was shaking, but not with tears, with rage. "You think you can just walk in here in your trash can suit and take everything? This is my house. This is my husband's inheritance. You are nothing but a squatter." I watched her approach. I felt a strange sense of calm. For years, this woman had whispered poison into my son's ear. She had encouraged his gambling. She had live-streamed my eviction. She had worn Catherine's jewelry as a trophy. She was the architect of this rot just as much as Bradley was. I didn't step back. I stood my ground right next to the table where the unsigned check for $5.5 million still lay, a worthless piece of paper that had almost cost my son his life. Solomon Roth stepped up beside me, ready to intervene, but I held up a hand. This was personal. This was family business. Monica stopped 3 feet from me. She smoothed her dress, trying to regain the composure she had flaunted earlier. "Listen to me, Lawrence," she said, dropping her voice to a venomous whisper. "You are going to fix this. You are going to sign that check. You are going to authorize the transfer of the funds to Bradley's personal account. And then you are going to resign as trustee." I looked at her, genuinely curious. "And why would I do that, Monica?" "Because if you don't," she sneered, leaning in closer, the smell of her expensive perfume mixing with the scent of her desperation. "I will make sure you never see your son again. I will make sure he hates you until the day you die. I will twist the narrative so hard the world will think you stole his birthright. I am good at social media, Lawrence. I can destroy you with one post." I looked down at Bradley, who was still sobbing on the floor, oblivious to his wife's threats. Then I looked back at Monica. "You think you still have power here?" I asked quietly. "I am his wife," she spat. "I am the lady of this house, and you are trespassing." I looked past her toward the main doors. The security team was standing there, unsure of what to do. They were hired guns loyal to the paycheck. But standing near the kitchen entrance, watching the scene with grim satisfaction, was an older man in a gray uniform. It was Henry, the head of household security. He had been with Catherine for 30 years. He had driven her to chemotherapy appointments. He had carried her groceries. He had been there when I left 20 years ago, and he had shaken my hand and told me he understood. He was looking at me now, waiting for an order. I nodded at him. Henry straightened his back. He walked forward, his heavy boots thudding on the floor. 2 other guardsmen I recognized from the old days fell in step behind him. Monica saw them coming. She smiled triumphantly. Finally, she said, "Security, remove this old man. He is bothering me." Henry stopped in front of us. He looked at Monica. He didn't blink. "Mrs. Prentice," Henry said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I am afraid there has been a change in management." Monica frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Do your job. Throw him out." "My job is to protect the Prentice estate," Henry said. "And the trustee has declared you a security risk." Monica gasped. She took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. "You can't be serious. I live here." "Not anymore," I said. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "You are trespassing, Monica. You are not a beneficiary of the trust. You are not an employee of the company. And as of this moment, you are not a guest in this house. You can't kick me out," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am wearing a $10,000 dress. I have rights." "You have 5 minutes," I said calmly. 5 minutes to pack a bag and leave. Whatever you can carry. Everything else stays. The cars, the furniture, the art. It all belongs to the trust." She looked at Bradley. "Bradley, do something. Your father is throwing me out." Bradley didn't even look up. He was broken. He was staring at the floor, muttering to himself about sharks and prisons. He had checked out of reality. Monica turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. She reached for the necklace around her throat. Catherine's sapphire. "Fine," she spat. "I'm leaving, but I'm taking this. It was a gift." "No," I said. I held out my hand. "Give it to me." "Make me," she challenged, clutching the jewels. Henry stepped closer, looming over her. "Ma'am, surrender the property of the estate, or we will call the police and add theft to the list of charges." Monica looked at Henry. She looked at the other guards. She looked at the flashing lights of the police cars that were now pulling into the driveway outside. She realized she was outnumbered. She realized the game was over. With a scream of frustration, she unclasped the necklace. She threw it at me. I caught it. The cool metal and the heavy stone settled into my palm. It felt like a heartbeat. I hope you rot in hell, Lawrence, she hissed. I carefully placed the necklace in my pocket right next to the letters. Goodbye, Monica, I said. Henry gestured to the door. This way, ma'am. She stormed out, her heels clacking violently, followed by the guards. She didn't look back at her husband. She didn't look back at the life she had lost. She just ran, escaping the sinking ship, before the water reached her neck. Now it was just me, Solomon, and Bradley. The room felt enormous and empty. The party decorations looked garish in the silence. I turned to the table. The check was still there. $5,500,000. Written in Bradley's shaky handwriting. Signed with a flourish that he thought made him look powerful. I picked it up. The paper felt crisp and expensive. Bradley lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. He saw the check in my hand. Dad, he croaked. Please, you can still fix this. Just sign it. If you sign it, they won't kill me. I can go to prison. I don't care, just pay them. Don't let me die for this. I looked at the check. It represented everything Bradley had done wrong. The shortcuts, the lies, the belief that money could solve any problem, that consequences were for other people. If I signed this, I would be saving his body, but I would be damning his soul. I would be validating his entire worldview. I would be telling him that yes, if you scream loud enough, if you cry hard enough, Daddy will make the bad men go away. I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I looked at my son. You said I would get nothing, I said softly. My voice echoed in the quiet hall. You stood there on that staircase looking down at me like I was dirt, and you told the world that I was getting zero. Nada. Bradley flinched. I was angry. I didn't mean it. You meant every word I said. And you were right, Bradley. He blinked, confused. What, I didn't get a dime, I said. I held up the check. I didn't get the mansion. I didn't get the Ferrari. I didn't get the millions in the bank. You were right. The will didn't leave me a single penny of your mother's fortune. I gripped the check with both hands. But she left me something worth much more than money, I said. She left me the burden. She left me the responsibility. I ripped the check in half. The sound was sharp and final, like a bone snapping. She gave me the power to decide if you get a dime or not. Bradley let out a strangled cry as the two halves of the check fluttered to the floor. And today I said, ripping the pieces again and again until they were nothing but confetti, today the answer is no. I let the pieces fall. They settled on the Persian rug like snow. You are broke, Bradley, I said. You are penniless. You have no assets to leverage. You have no inheritance to promise. You are of no value to the sharks anymore. They can't collect from a man who owns nothing. I turned to Solomon. Mr. Roth, are the police outside? They are waiting for your signal, Lawrence Solomon said, closing his briefcase. Send them in, I said. Bradley scrambled backward, crab-walking across the floor away from the door. No, Dad. Please, not the cops. It's the only way, son. I said, feeling a tear track through the dust on my cheek. It's the only place you're safe. And it's the only place you'll learn. The heavy oak doors opened. Blue and red lights flooded the grand hall, washing out the warm glow of the chandeliers. Uniformed officers stepped inside, their faces grim. I stepped aside. I didn't look away. I watched as they handcuffed my son. I watched as they read him his rights. I watched as he was led away, weeping, stripped of his dignity, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of everything except the consequences of his own actions. As they took him out, he looked back at me one last time. His eyes were filled with fears, but also something else. Confusion. He still didn't understand. He would. I had to believe he would. Solomon walked up to me. He handed me a glass of water. "You did it, Lawrence," he said quietly. I took the water. My hands were shaking again. "Did I asked. It feels like I just destroyed him." "You destroyed the parasite," Solomon said. "Now the man has a chance to grow." I looked down at the shredded check on the floor. I looked at the plastic chair in the corner. I looked at the portrait of Catherine above the fireplace. She looked stern, but I thought I saw a hint of a smile in her painted eyes. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was already starting to change. The smell of greed was fading, replaced by the sterile scent of justice. "I have work to do," I said. "Yes, you do," Solomon agreed. I adjusted my torn jacket. I walked toward the door, ready to face the cameras, ready to face the creditors, ready to face the long, hard road of rebuilding what my son had broken. I didn't get the money. I got the job. And for the first time in 20 years, I was ready to work. The sirens outside were deafening now, a cacophony of red and blue lights slicing through the windows of the grand hall. The sharks, the men in the cheap suits who dealt in broken bones and unmarked graves, didn't run like panicked children. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of professionals who knew exactly how much time they had before the handcuffs clicked. But the leader, the man with the scar running through his eyebrow, stopped for one heartbeat. He didn't look at the police cars screeching up the driveway. He didn't look at Solomon Roth. He looked directly at Bradley. Bradley was still on his knees, surrounded by the confetti of the $5 million check I had destroyed. He looked up at the shark, his eyes wide with a plea for mercy that would never come. The shark didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply raised his hand and tapped his wrist where a watch would be. Then he pointed a single finger at Bradley and dragged it slowly across his own throat. The message was absolute. The debt hadn't been canceled just because the check was torn. The debt was still owed, and now the collateral was Bradley's life. With a final cold sneer, the shark turned and vanished into the shadows, slipping out a side exit, just seconds before the heavy boots of the police officers hit the front steps. Bradley let out a whimper, a sound so pathetic it barely sounded human. He scrambled forward, trying to follow them, trying to explain, trying to beg for more time. But he stopped when he saw the look on his wife's face. Monica had not run. She stood frozen near the entryway, her chest heaving, her face a mask of calculated horror. She watched the sharks leave. She watched the police arriving. And then she looked at her husband, the man who had promised her the world just 20 minutes ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was no money. There was no mansion. There were no Ferraris. There was only a mountain of debt and a husband who was about to be arrested for fraud. Bradley reached out to her. "Monica," he sobbed. "Baby, please, you have to help me. Call your father. He has money. We can fix this." Monica looked at his outstretched hand, as if it were covered in leprosy. Her lip curled in pure, unadulterated disgust. "My father." She spat, her voice shrill and vibrating with rage. "You want me to call my father? You told me you were worth $30 million. You told me the company was ours. You told me this was a dynasty. It was supposed to be." Bradley cried. "He cheated me. He stole it." "He didn't steal anything, you idiot," Monica screamed. She took a step toward him, looming over his kneeling form. "He outsmarted you. Your father, the man you treated like a dog, played you like a fiddle. And you were too stupid and too arrogant to see it coming." She reached down to her left hand. She ripped the diamond engagement ring off her finger. It was a massive stone, another purchase Bradley had likely made with stolen money, or on credit he didn't have. She didn't hand it to him. She threw it. The ring hit Bradley in the forehead and bounced away, clattering across the marble floor. "I am done," Monica announced. "I am not going to be the wife of a felon. I am not going to be the widow of a gambling addict, and I am certainly not going to live on minimum wage. Monica, wait, Bradley begged, crawling toward her. We are married, till death do us part. Consider this death, Monica said, cold as ice. The death of my patience, the death of your bank account, and the death of us. She turned on her heel. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of something else there. Respect, maybe even fear. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that I had won, and then she walked out the front door, passing the incoming police officers without even blinking. She was a survivor, a parasite looking for a new host. And Bradley had just been discarded. Now he was truly alone. The grand hall felt cavernous. The festive decorations, the flowers, the buffet tables laden with food, it all looked grotesque, now a party for a corpse. Bradley watched her go. He watched the last lifeline disappear. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked down at his hands. His expensive manicure ruined his cuffs, stained with the dust of the floor. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward me. I hadn't moved. I stood by the table next to Solomon Roth, watching the destruction of my son's life. It was necessary, but that didn't make it easy to watch. Dad, Bradley whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He crawled toward me. He didn't stand up. He moved on his hands and knees, dragging his expensive suit across the floor, shuffling through the pieces of the torn check. He looked like a penitent pilgrim seeking absolution at a shrine. He reached my feet. He reached out and grabbed the fabric of my trousers. The same torn trousers he had mocked an hour ago. He buried his face in the rough wool. Dad, please, he sobbed. His voice was muffled by the fabric wet with tears and snot. You can't let them arrest me. You can't let the sharks hurt me. I am your son. I looked down at the top of his head. I remembered when he was a baby, and I would hold him in the crook of my arm, amazed at how small and fragile he was. I remembered promising Catherine that I would always keep him safe. I am scared, Dad, he wept. I am so scared. They are going to kill me in prison, or the sharks will get me. Please, you have the power now. You are the trustee. You can sign a new check. You can make it all go away. Just pay them. I will do anything. I will work in the warehouse. I will sweep the floors. Just save me. His grip tightened on my leg. He was shaking violently. I love you, Dad, he cried. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. Just please don't let me die. I felt a crack in my heart. A fissure of pain so deep it almost brought me to my knees beside him. It would be so easy. It would be so easy to pick up the pen to write a check to make the bad men go away. It was what I had done his whole life. It was what Catherine had done. But look where it had brought us. If I saved him now, if I bailed him out one last time, he would never change. He would learn that tears and begging were just another currency, another way to manipulate the world. He would survive, but he wouldn't live. He would remain a child, forever stunted and dangerous. Solomon Roth placed a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his touch was a reminder. Stay strong. This is the only way. I looked at the police officers who were now entering the room, their hands on their holsters, their eyes scanning the scene. They saw a broken man on the floor and an old man standing over him. I reached down. I placed my hand on Bradley's head. His hair was soft, just like his mother's. I love you too, son, I whispered. My voice was thick with grief. Bradley looked up, hope flooding his tear-stained face. You do. So you will help me. You will pay them. I shook my head slowly. No, Bradley. I am going to help you, but not by paying them. I pulled my leg away from his grasp. I stepped back, creating a distance between us that felt like an ocean. "I am going to let you face the consequences," I said, "because that is the only thing that can save you now." I looked at the lead police officer. I nodded toward my son. "That is him," I said. "That is the man who forged the signature." Bradley screamed. It was a sound of pure betrayal of disbelief. "No, Dad. No." But it was too late. The officers moved in. They pulled him up from the floor. They pulled his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. I watched through a blur of tears as they read him his rights. I watched as he struggled, looking back at me with eyes full of hatred and fear. I didn't look away. I owed him that much. I would watch him fall so that one day, God willing, I could watch him rise. The sound of the heavy oak doors closing behind the police officers was the most final sound I had ever heard. It echoed through the cavernous hall like the tolling of a funeral bell. My son was gone. The screaming had stopped, leaving a silence that felt bruised and tender. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where Bradley had knelt. The confetti of the torn check was still scattered on the rug, a $1 million snowstorm that had melted into nothing. Detective Miller, the officer in charge, walked up to me. He held the thick file of evidence Solomon had prepared. The forged deed, the loan applications, the proof of a son stealing the very roof from over his dying mother's head. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Prentice?" the detective asked. His voice was low, respectful. "Once we file these charges, there is no going back. It is a felony. He is looking at 5 to 10 years. I looked at the detective. I saw a man doing his job. I saw a man who probably had kids of his own. "I am sure," I said. My voice didn't waver even though my heart was breaking. But why, the detective asked. "He is your boy. Most fathers would pay the debt. You have the money now. You could have made it go away." I walked over to the window. I looked out at the driveway where the police cruiser was pulling away, its lights flashing in the twilight. "If I paid the debt," I said, "I would be signing his death warrant." The detective frowned. "I don't understand." "Those men, the ones who were here," I said, turning back to him. "They don't forgive. They don't forget. If I paid them today, Bradley would borrow again tomorrow. He would be back in this hole within a month. And next time I might not be here to catch him. Or he might owe someone who doesn't take checks." I pointed at the retreating police car. "In there, he is safe. The sharks can't get to him in a cell. The bookies can't break his legs in a maximum security unit. I am not sending him to prison to punish him, detective. I am sending him there to keep him alive." The detective nodded slowly. He tipped his cap. "It is a hard love, sir. It is the only kind left," I said. He left. The house was finally empty. Solomon walked over to the sidebar. He found a bottle of whiskey that Bradley hadn't opened yet. He poured 2 glasses. He didn't say a word. He just handed one to me. We walked through the silent house. We walked past the portraits of ancestors who weren't mine but whose legacy I now carried. We walked into Catherine's private study. It smelled like her. Lavender and old paper. Her desk was exactly as she had left it. There was a photo in a silver frame on the corner. It was a picture of the 3 of us. Me, Catherine, and a 5-year-old Bradley building a sandcastle on the beach. We looked so happy. We looked invincible. I sat down in her chair. It felt big. It felt right. It felt... Solomon sat opposite me just like old times. "He will hate you for this," Solomon said, taking a sip of his drink. "I know," I said. "Let him hate me. Hate is a fuel. It will keep him going. Maybe in 5 years when he gets out, he will hate me enough to prove me wrong. Maybe he will get a job. Maybe he will build something of his own just to spite me." "And if he doesn't?" Solomon asked. Then the trust will take care of him, I said. A roof over his head. Food on his table. But no Ferraris. No mansions. He will live a simple life. The life I lived. And he will learn that it is enough. I looked around the room. I looked at the piles of paperwork, the ledgers, the future of the company. What about you, Lawrence? Solomon asked. You have the house, you have the cars, you have the millions. What are you going to do? Move in? I laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. In this mausoleum, no. This isn't a home, Solomon. It is a museum. I don't belong here. I took the letters out of my pocket. I placed them next to the photo on the desk. I am going back to the apartment, I said. Solomon raised an eyebrow. The one above the laundromat. The very same. I will buy the building, fix the roof, maybe get a better mattress. But that is my home. It is quiet. It is real. And the money, Solomon asked, gesturing to the room. The 30 million. I looked at the whiskey in my glass. I saw the reflection of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Catherine had a list, I said. A list of charities she never got around to starting. A scholarship fund for kids who grow up in neighborhoods like mine. A program for addiction recovery. A pension fund for the workers Bradley fired. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. I am going to spend it all, Solomon. Every dime. I am going to build a legacy that Bradley can be proud of when he finally wakes up. I am going to make sure that the name Prentice means something again. Solomon stood up and joined me at the window. He clinked his glass against mine. To Catherine, he said. To Catherine, I replied. I took a sip. The whiskey tasted like victory. It tasted like sorrow. It tasted like peace. I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a king. I was just a trustee, a guardian of a ghost's wishes. But as I looked out at the world, my son was safe and the future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, I felt rich. I learned that saving someone doesn't always mean giving them what they want. Sometimes true love means letting them fall so they can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. My son spent his whole life believing that wealth was measured in bank accounts and mansions, but I discovered that real richness comes from integrity and the peace of a clear conscience. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can never buy character. By stripping away his safety net, I gave him the only thing that could actually save his life: accountability. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but looking at the future, I know it was the right choice. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of tough love, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments if you think I made the right decision.